Greetings, everyone. Nate the Nerdarchy here from Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds, hanging out with a nerd.
By Editor Doug.
All right, and today we are going to be discussing SpellJammer because we both wanted to, and no one's here to stop us.
Yes. And it's a popular topic out there. People want to take their adventures into space.
Yeah, and that's really exciting because I dig space a lot. I've always liked the concept of being able to play and go out and hang out in space. So a game that's going to let me do that without too much crunch.
Yes.
I love watching Star Trek. I would never want to try and explain something in character in a game like Star Trek does.
Yeah, side note, that is one of the intimidating things about that Star Trek Adventures game that I've heard a few people say. They're like, it looks cool, but I don't know enough about Star Trek to hold my own.
Yeah, and the thing I like about the idea of SpellJammer is that it's all about basically it's just D&D in space is the way I like to look at it. You're just crafting narratives that are going to be more space themed or more like more involving more than just a single world. Like you can have this is where you could definitely have like space encroaching from another dimension or something like that, and like crazy things that are going to affect entire regions or campaign settings.
Yeah.
Cross campaigns and things.
Yeah, actually, that reminds me. I was going to say, for people that might have heard the term or didn't hear the term and didn't know, SpellJammer was a second edition campaign setting designed to kind of link all their different worlds, because they had just a ton of campaign settings at the time, like Kryn from Dragonlance and Greyhawk and Forgotten Realms. So SpellJammer was a way that you could have your adventurers travel between all those things. And the basic premise is all these worlds and the solar systems essentially that they're in exist inside giant crystal spheres that are floating in a material called the phlogiston, which is like an old Greek term, but it was basically just like a gaseous stuff. And when you took your ship in there, you could travel between the crystal spheres extremely fast. And most of the science, or all of the science stuff that might be involved in space travel, was just explained by magic. Like the ship generates its own pocket of air, and it's propelled by a spellcaster sitting on a SpellJammer helm, which uses their magical energy to move it forward and create that atmosphere around it.
That's a good point, bringing up the SpellJammer ship and it's what it's fueled by. But one thing I want to take care of, White Rabbit had a question in the comments: are there aliens in SpellJammers? And yes, it's kind of like everybody is an alien in a sense to everybody else. So if you like, but there are like alien races like the Illithids. This is where they hang out, is in the SpellJamming universe. There are Illithids. They don't have the Master Empire that they once did, the Galactic Empire that they once did, but they are still around. And
they actually sort of reference SpellJammer a little bit in, I think it's the Monster Manual entry for the Illithid, because they talk about the Nautiloid ship and how they use it to sail the Astral Sea, but in the origin of that, the Nautiloid ship is an iconic ship from the SpellJammer universe.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And as far as aliens in there, I'd say there's non-playable races. I would say the Illithid is one of them. And is it Nigaloshi? They're these weird furry spider centaur.
Oh, the Neogi.
Neogi. Who's the Nigaloshi?
Yeah. Which are in Volo's guide.
Can you play them?
No, they're enemies, but they're notorious slavers, and they use Umber Hulks as like their bodyguards and things like that.
Okay. Yeah, so they're the slaver race in that realm. And so if you basically I forget, I want to keep saying Nigaloshi, and that is not it.
Neogi.
The Neogi. The Neogi are going to be the like kind of if they're pirating you want to not get captured because you're probably going to be a slave.
Yeah, I think they have like psionic enslavement powers and things like that too. So also speaking to that whole idea of like, is there aliens? That's one of the beauties that I've found, because I run a home game that's it's 5th edition, but I kind of use SpellJammer ideas. Like you're saying, everything is an alien, so it really opens up your options as far as like storytelling, I think, because something like an Illithid, I mean, they're if they're just considered like an alien, then they're not immediately like that's a monstrous threat that we have to fight. I mean, it could just be like a shopkeeper or somebody you see walking down the street in like some asteroid outpost town or whatever. Like it kind of like allows you more freedom to play with those sorts of things. Where like in a traditional setting, like if a mind flayer walked into the little town, then obviously there's going to be an awkward situation. But like in space, I mean, there's beholders and Dwargar and Illithid, and and elves and everything just kind of exist together.
Yeah, exactly. So back to the concept of the spacecraft flying through the flow. I was kind of thinking that if they decide to go with the astral sea concept, and it's more like you're traveling through, almost like the astral sea is a shortcut in between all these places. I'm fine because the flow. I mean, it was like, man, I wasn't super attached to it. The idea of it, I would rather.
Right.
I actually kind of like the idea of making it cold and dark and inhabitable, like real space. And when my Spiders to Mars fan game, I kind of had that aspect of space in there.
That's not a bad idea because I see why they did it at the time. Because just thinking like, well, traveling from one essentially galaxy to another would take a long time. So even though and there's all these calculations in the original material of like how fast you would go in wild space, which is basically the blackness of space inside a sphere. I mean, and you can still go pretty fast if you do the math. I think you're going like millions of miles an hour basically. But even still, it would take you a long, like ridiculously long time to get to another solar system. So when you're in the flow, you're moving even faster than that.
Yeah, basically the flow is like almost like hyperspace.
Yeah.
Highways, interstellar highways in a sense, and it also made it so that you could technically just, if you had if your ship was out of power, you could just continue to just go in a direction with like literal sails and things like that. So I was thinking for the propulsion. Did you want to say something?
No, go ahead.
Okay, I was thinking about for the propulsion for what I'm envisioning for 5e SpellJammer is that for propulsion we would have this. I like the spelljamming helm where you have either something that has spell-like ability and magical effort, and it can either, if it doesn't have spell slots, then it could exert its kind of like exerting hit dice or exerting getting fatigue. I could see that as ways of propelling the ship forward. I could also see it as if like you had a type of space combat where you had special maneuvers, like I discussed in my article way back in the day on Nerdarchy.com, about these being able to use different spell slots to be able to produce different maneuvers of the ship.
Yeah, I like the idea with the hit die. That kind of speaks to your ongoing series right now about using hit die, but it kind of is like the next step from spell slots too, because you think like, well, spell slots are using your magical energy that you know how to manipulate, and it's like, well, if you don't have that, then you're just using your chi or life force or however you want to think of it, and it gives you like a pool of resource beyond like hit points, because obviously that could be expended pretty quickly if you just started using hit points, which they do have something like that in the original stuff with the life jammers.
Yeah, and I think that should also be in there as well. I think every good ship would have like a backup where like, oh no, like something happened, our arcane person fell sick, they're no longer able to do this stuff. They died in a raid or whatever, and we're stuck out in space in the astral sea. We need somebody to sit in this chair and get really tired.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea, especially it kind of fits with like the 5e design philosophy. It's like, obviously there's classes that are better than others, but there's at least a chance for anybody to be able to do something. So like you just said, if you got totally stranded or you only had one spellcaster in the party and he died or whatever, you're not just like boned out there in space. Although that can make for dramatic stuff too. I mean, with my players, like they had to think about like, well, we only have one spellcaster in our group, so they need to hire somebody, and to have like backup pilots. And speaking of your article, and I've done a few on the Nerdarchy website too. I do think it's interesting and speaks to the fact that they, it's still a popular setting that SpellJammer 5e is like the fourth most searched term where people arrive at the Nerdarchy website. So obviously there's a lot of fans out there for that. And a couple weeks ago, Mike Merles even had a tweet said, I actually pulled it up here. It says, "I know patience is difficult, but we really are looking at ways to bring all the settings back, even SpellJammer." So it is on their mind. So yeah, it's definitely a good idea for us to throw some ideas out there. Maybe they'll hear them. But yeah, I like your idea of having backup systems like that.
And I also kind of want to have, because you could be out on like an asteroid or something like that, I want to have this mechanic, like a luck, like an actual luck score. I know they have that. I think in the DMG, there's like
I like one of those alternate, like with
I feel like there's an alternate
sanity
score,
and the honor
right?
and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
And if there isn't, we could just make one. That's
Sure.
luck, or considered like a almost like a, hey, you need this thing. Did you just happen to randomly put it in your ship? That kind of, hey, did I pack an extra oxygen tank? I could really need one. It doesn't say it's on the manifest, but somebody could have thought, hey, there's always room for more oxygen. Like that kind of mentality, where you're where you're not just stuck like, oh, we need to travel back to this planet to pick up this one little object that we need. So,
although, to play devil's advocate, like with my group, that a big part of our sessions is them planning and plotting and just stocking their ship and making sure, like, doing like, how long is it going to take us to get there, like how much food are we going to need and things like that. So that can be like kind of a fun aspect too. And as the DM, it's like, well, if they do get in that situation, it's like that could be a good time for random encounters too. You're just floating in space. It's like somebody comes by. Are they going to be helpful? I don't know. Maybe not.
yeah,
Maybe to be helpful with a twist.
Yeah, we need this one object. Can you help us out? And they're like, oh yeah, we have those, but it's going to cost you.
Yeah.
So yeah, you could turn it into that.
Yeah. To go back to, you mentioned doing the different maneuvers and stuff. I kind of took that idea as well from you, as inspired by your article, and kind of came up with a little ship combat primer based on that idea too. And because in my game, for a while, nobody wanted to ever pilot the ship because it's like, well, I'm just sitting there. We didn't have like mechanics for it or anything, so they, if they had an encounter, they didn't really get to do anything. So now, I came up with a bunch of ways to basically use spell slots to do all sorts of things like, evasive maneuvers, offensive maneuvers, like to go faster, to ram, other ships and things like that. Man, they love ramming enemies, which is great because, that damages the ship, and it's like, oh, all that money you just got, now you got to pay to repair the ship. So yeah, I'm definitely curious to see what a 5th edition official thing would look like. You probably onto something there with, as far as like the Astral Sea, especially since A, it's mentioned in the book, and B, it just kind of makes more sense than the crystal spheres and the phlogiston, which is kind of cool though. I mean, just visually, it sounds neat. It's like a giant crystal Dyson sphere, basically.
Yeah, and you know what? You could probably, the thing is, I would think is, if it's the Astral Sea, then you would actually see a crystalline sphere. It's like the influence of all the local deities and powerful beings and everything. Like it's like the collective electromagnetic field of their presence would probably resolve itself into some kind of crystalline barrier.
True, and then you get a chance for a new spell too, Open Portal, because in the 2nd edition, that's how you had to get through, because your ship couldn't pass through it, so you would have to open a portal in the crystal sphere to move through it. Which was a funny situation with my group again, because they're not very investigative. So, and I gave them their own ship. That's how they started.
Did
their
they
adventures.
crash into the crystal sphere?
No, they just got there and they're like, "What do we do now?" I'm just like, "I don't know. What do you do?" So they had to go all the way back and, used a bunch of resources, obviously, because it had taken them some time to get to that point, food and stuff like that. So it's just fun to mess with them, things like that. But now, like now they're like I said, they spend a lot of time like plotting out like we need food, and they love it. They love like buying furniture for their ship and
Oh,
hiring
that's really
crew
cool.
members. hmm And speaking of going back to the idea of them being aliens, that works for as far as like NPC crew members too, because it gives me a lot of latitude to like let them have a really diverse mix of different beings as crew members, and I can just use the stat blocks right out of the monster manual. Like they have like an orc. Well, they're called Scrow in the Spelljammer universe, which is just orcs backwards, but those are space orcs.
Sports.
They yeah, Scrow, but they have like an orc war chief or whatever it is, like the thing in the monster manual, the CR 3 or 4. But it's just like they had a big contest, and it was like they were hiring a security chief, so one of them they had to like bare knuckles fight him, and I just pulled the stat block, and you know they hired him on, and it's another way to drain money too, but so they have like a really strange crew. They have like a flame skull, the orc. There's a Githyanki in their crew, so it's pretty fun.
Oh yeah, the Githyanki. Yeah.
Yeah, who are also big in the Spelljammer lore and the Astral Sea too. So I'm sure they'll play heavily in a 5th edition iteration.
Yeah, I could see definitely lizard men or some iterate form of lizard men would be like a commonality in space.
I think in 2nd edition they were like a prominent Spelljammer race, right?
I think they were, yeah. And I would also like to see some kind of race that's naturally adapted in the sense of not necessarily adapted to space, but let's say they have a hibernation cycle, like they're from a cold world, and they just take a nap when they're in the ship, going someplace.
You know what else would be cool is a plant-based race, because they could help generate oxygen just by being on the ship.
Oh yeah, that would be nice. That would be a nice addition, like a tree ant, like an ant type.
Creature. Get some Vegapygmies on your crew from Polo's Guide.
Yeah.
They can help generate oxygen.
That's a good idea. Now, there's other ways where you just say, well, once you activate the Spelljammer helm, all that's taken care of, and you don't have to worry about oxygen or heat or light.
It does deplete, though.
Yeah.
The air, it slowly degrades, which is another aspect that really makes the adventures interesting. When they have to plot out, like, it's going to take, 60 days to get here. I mean, and the ship only holds so much oxygen.
So by the end of it, if you do make it in time, you're like, oh, this air tastes so bad.
Yeah. Well, I use some like the exhaustion things and poison conditions and stuff. Like after it starts getting stale, it's like they're considered poisoned, and then they start taking levels of exhaustion. So there's been a couple times when they just barely made it.
They need an alchemist with a rebreather. He could set out a pot in the middle of that just.
I think in the original rules too, it's like if you just came by a big body that had its own atmosphere, it would replenish your air. But that can be a good time for adventures too, because it's like, sure, from your plan is like, oh, we're just gonna swing by. It's like, but then something happens, of course. I just heard a podcast recently from Robert Aducci, who's the Adventures League community manager, and amongst other things. But he does a podcast about Dark Sun. And they were talking about survival and how you have to have like water and food. And one of the things he does is uses like glass beads to represent how much water they have on the trips, and he'll just put it in the table and like take them away as they go. And I thought that would be an interesting way to do your air too.
Oh,
so
yeah.
It's like that visual thing, like you just keep every so often like, up, you're down in air, it's getting low, so kind of add that tension to the game.
And really, really nice ships would have these like portable devices that give you your own little kind of like shell of atmosphere, and that kind of stuff. So if you did get dumped off the side, it's like a preserver or something like that.
Hey, you just float between the gravity plane because it's like right in the middle of the ship. Which what it always seemed funny to me is like in the in the original rules, a ship or a spell jamming vessel, the gravity plane is right in the center.
Mhm.
So if you fall out of the ship, you would bob between the line. So I'm always curious, like when you go below deck, is everything stuck to the ceiling? Or like, and if it is, like, what about when you go into like an atmosphere? Does it just all fall?
I think it's magic.
Yeah. Which actually is funny. There's a question that I was gonna say that's the answer to a lot of things in SpellJammer. Somebody said,
Yeah.
where was it? Find that question here. I think it was. I can't find, but it was like, how is it different than Starfinder? It's like because it's magic. There's no fuel or anything. It's just all magic.
Yeah.
Like you don't know how to explain something because magic.
Yeah, and you can get as tech heavy into it as you want, but it's really you're taking it away from just the D&D and space aspect of it. Like, how do you fly in the game? Well, they didn't make airplanes; people just cast fly.
Yeah, right.
So in this case, this is just a house. It could be Baba Yaga's hut with a spell jamming helm inside of it and be flying through space with an atmosphere. It doesn't have to be sealed off. It could be a skeleton pirate ship flying through the astral sea. It's not. Oh, you know
That's
what?
one of the things I like the most is that they aren't like sealed in ships. It's just like a lot like a galleon, or there's a lot of strange looking ships like animal shaped things, or dwarves. Just like it's a big anvil, and then, and they work in the forges to power the spell jamming.
Yeah, I'm going to do some screen sharing going on here.
Yeah, a lot of the original art is very evocative of what you might think.
Yeah, so here we go.
To answer those questions.
Yeah, so this is just to give you, for people who aren't super familiar with SpellJammer, here's some examples of ships. I mean, it's a flying eagle carved out of wood.
Yeah.
This isn't actually SpellJammer. I think this is Champions of Mystra, but this could easily be a spelljamming ship. There's, here's the Nautilus. That would be similar to what like the Illithids zoom around in. Pirates, realm space, good. And these are some very easy examples to kind of say like, oh yeah, some people design it like thematically, like, oh, it's a fish swimming through the sea, or it's a giant squid with some sails on it and stuff. But that's
actually
just like
okay. People that are familiar with Storm King's Thunder might recognize that squid ship right there because there is one in that campaign.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I just saw somebody had tweeted to Chris Perkins recently, and they're like, "Is that deliberate to have that SpellJammer, throwback in there?" He's like, "Maybe." So it's definitely on their mind.
And here's a Miyogi.
Yep.
It looks like a giant mosquito with space sails on it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got some armament and its crew. It tells you all the different kinds of stuff with it. So this is not aerodynamic. This is not something I would fly through space with. But if I had a spell
do you really need to be aerodynamic in space? There's no air.
You don't. Well, I mean, the larger area you are, the better chance of getting hit with asteroids in space, like little tiny bits that are gonna like blow a hole in a sail or something. But for the most part, that's space. But it was for spell jamming, they don't have to be. They can be anything you want. If you want it, if you wanted to just take your city and say, yep, we're going to space, let's get some spell jamming helms on here and get all of our wizards tower to launch us. You could just be like, yeah, we're launching this part of the world into space. A floating castle in your world might actually be a spell jamming vessel that is docked, in the realm. So if you had a floating castle, maybe they discover something like at higher level when you're like, I'm done with this world and let's do something else. And they're going to go off.
And there's a lot of different ways to approach adding it or starting a campaign, which a lot of that is discussed in the second edition stuff, which by the way is available on the Dungeon Masters Guild if you're interested. Even if you don't play second edition, there's a ton of great ideas and lore and art in those books that can just give you a lot of ideas. But Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to approach it. Like with my group, we were just playing a regular campaign, and I actually saw those Nerdarchy videos of playing SpellJammer. Like, that's a really fun idea. So I just gave them a ship that they discovered and took off. So they have their own ship, which, talk about sandbox. It's like they can literally go anywhere in the universe that they want. So it's like kind of hard to rein it in.
I just wanted to take a break.
Sure.
Dave, Nerdarchy's Ted and Nerdarchy's Dave are at Harry Potter World currently, and they're saying hello.
Oh, are they watching us?
I guess
we
so.
haven't,
they're
we haven't burned the place down yet.
Yeah. The internet has not lit on fire in our corner. So they're over thanks to all the people from the GoFundMe and our people that regularly donate to us that help us out. They're over currently hanging out in the LA area. They're going to be doing a interview with Satine Phoenix of Geek and Sundry. Well, she's of Mazakana on the Geek and Sundry channel of the GM Tips. And that is I don't know when that's going to be airing, but they're going to be filming it tomorrow. So that's why they're out there on the West Coast, several thousand miles away.
I was just looking in the chat. Boy, it's pretty lively in there. White Rabbit says, did SpellJammer tech get given to the people or invented slowly, and was the gap between haves and have-nots ever tumultuous? I don't know offhand where it came from. Oh, I think there was this race of people called Arcanes, maybe. Is that what they were, like those tall blue people? And they actually were the only ones that some of the only ones that knew how to make SpellJammer helms.
I feel like they're the classic gray alien.
Yeah.
They're kind of bluish, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they would strike me as the people that would have invented spell jamming.
Mm-hmm. And then there is actually the SpellJammer is a ship. It's a humongous manta ray shaped ship with like a city on the back. And there's there's a special, I think it's a crown or some kind of item. It takes different forms of like whoever's the captain at the time. But that's like a mysterious thing, and they kind of hint at. And there's a campaign based around the actual ship too. So you can use that in your game for various ways. Like in mine, it's like they haven't really explored it much, but that's like the only way to get to the big bad, or one of the only ways is aboard the SpellJammer. But going back to like adding it to your campaign, like if you don't want to have them have their own ship, you can make them a crew on a ship. You can, if they want to start in space, there's a great pre-made city called the Rock of Brawl, which is basically just a city on a huge asteroid. So they can hire on as crew, or you can just have adventures on the Rock of Brawl and they only occasionally leave there via ship.
You could also have it where maybe they come into contact with a downed ship, like an old Illithid ship, or some other situation where there's actually a mage who's creating a spell jamming helm, and they either capture it from him or defeat him, or he's they're his crew.
Or he succeeds and takes off while they're on it. If it was something true. Like you were saying, like a whole wizard's tower was a ship, how cool would that be? You go through the dungeon, and it's like, now you're on there, and the ship just takes off. That would throw them for a loop, right?
Yeah, it's like the tower shakes, and then it starts flying through space.
Yeah.
Just like that.
I think throwing it in without telling the players sometimes it can be fun. Like when I did, they were like, what is going on here? Because they found a ship and they investigated and just sat on the helm and it just powered up and they were like, well, I want to think about it moving, and it was like, okay, it takes off, and they didn't have control, so it just took off and rose through the atmosphere, and they're like, what's going on? And they've been loving it ever since. So
yeah, so it can be introduced at pretty much at any point.
Mm-hmm.
Just like discovering another dungeon, this dungeon could be a buried spelljamming ship.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've just found there's a lot of interesting ways that it changes the campaign. Like they immediately, like they don't even seem to care about the plot. They're just like, we should start a business and we can, they're like the whole Firefly sort of, theme where it's like, we can transport people and get paid to do this and that. So like, I'd say at least half of our sessions are them like working out contracts for jobs or with hired crew, and I'm just sitting there listening. They love it. They're like, well, we'll pay, like if they want to hire a crew member, it's like, we'll pay you, like 1% of 50% of whatever we get on the contract, plus like you get expenses and blah, blah, blah. So, and they love just hashing out all that kind of stuff, which is cool because I can give them a lot of money and then have ways to take it away with like dock fees and, ship repairs and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, it's like, oh, we're going to pay you 100,000 gold, which is like enough to buy like an Uber castle.
Yeah.
But it's like, oh yeah, after everything's said and done, we have 5,000 left.
I guess giving them their own ship really trusts their buy-in, though, because you think about it, it's like they could just sell the ship and be like pretty wealthy. I mean,
oh yeah.
In the game where like a spell jamming, the helm itself is worth money. That's the most expensive part. And just having their own ship. But they actually started a business and they want to hire other adventurers to do all the jobs that they can't do themselves. And we were thinking, oh, that's cool, because then, if somebody else wants a DM, then we'll just be their employees in that game. So that's one avenue we're thinking about.
Yeah. Kurt says, were there dead crystal spheres to explore worlds with long dead races and gods? There could still be devils, demons, and undead galore, along with treasures of lost empires to scavenge. That sounds like an entire world dungeon. That sounds pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. And one of the original things was, I forget the name of the actual adventure, but it was a long campaign, and the boss actually was a huge, like, beholder-made artifact weapon that was like a planet killer. And you actually went in the dungeon in your ship. I mean, it was that big. And there was like parts to get off and fight things, but it was, an enormous weapon that you went inside of it.
Wow. That would be cool because you could have people off the ship and also the person that are going to pilot it and do like range attacks with the actual ship and stuff. So that would be neat hybrid combat. So I would say if there's dead crystal spheres, that could be a place where you could have all different kinds of adventures, kind of like dark, almost like I'm thinking about, what is it? Was it Hellgate or something like that? There was a good video game that I never got to play. It was kind of like Diablo, but it was like somebody screwed around and there was rifts, and it was like London and different places that there was like all this kind of craziness and demons.
Yeah,
and stuff.
I think that was a Richard Garriott game who made Ultima. But it was pretty short-lived. But yeah, I remember that, thinking that I never played it. But yeah, I know what you're talking about. It was hell something.
I think too many people thought it was awesome and didn't play it for it just didn't have the oomph.
I guess a lot of the things in SpellJammer you could apply to a nautical sort of campaign in D&D, or any game. With it being on a ship, it just adds that whole other layer of nuttiness of being in space. And the random encounters, like, they don't always have to be fights. I've had them encounter like gas clouds that do things, and
basically, if you've watched Star Trek.
Yep. I pull from there all the time, man.
Just take their non-combat or their puzzle encounters where they, where it still might be dangerous. People could actually still die, or they come upon people who have died, and they have to discover how not to die from this hazard. And it's like this nebulous trap or something. And that's a good point you bring up about the sea and stuff. Pretty much anything that you could think of doing with a regular ship in a sea, like in between continents, it's almost as if the different crystal spheres and worlds are continents. And the astral sea is like this sea that you would normally have in a seafaring campaign. So it's it's very translatable. I mean, in fact, the ship could be a ship that floats on water and then also just spell jams, and you just ascends and goes through the crystal sphere and out of there. So,
and a lot of the monsters, and which also, the official ones too, that leads me to believe they've had SpellJammer in mind too. Like, a lot of aquatic creatures really lend themselves to space too, like Kraken, Sea Spawn, and those sort of, like, was it Sea Scion or Scion in Volo's Guide? It's like, yeah, they're obviously nautical, but it's like they'd be pretty cool in space too.
And if it's more like the astral sea, you could have it where it's like not so much the deadliness of space, but so that there's actual things like floating around the ether,
I'll tell you what, a great resource for monsters for a SpellJammer game is that Tome of Beasts. There is a ton of cool, spacey, weird creatures in that. Starting with the Void Dragon, which essentially travels in space. That's the whole conceit of it. But there's like Star Spawn, and there's just a lot of weird, spacey creatures in Tome of Beasts.
Yeah, so I think they would really do well in that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as far as we talked about the space helms, the Spelljammers, and we also talked kind of about like the actual traveling. Make it as long as you want. It's story based. Like, how long do you make an ocean adventure? Well, until the next encounter you want to have, and then the next.
Yeah.
And do you want them to be fearing for the resources? Are they running low on food? Do they need to try and stop by some other island that's on this map that has food? Is there a port that's not so great that they might have to try and buy some supplies at to make it to their journey because they got someone came in and stole some stuff while they weren't looking, or there was a fight that they almost lost and they were rather than try and defeat them, the people actually took some of their supplies and ditched. So there's situations where it's all those kind of things, all those different kinds of adventures can happen, and so it's really like how much of the campaign do you want to be the actual journey? And I think in Spelljammer you can either have it be, it's like combat. You can either have D&D be lots of combat or almost none and still have a lot of fun with it. So in Spelljammer it's like you can have the journey be most of the campaign to get to someplace. Or you can have the journey be like, all right, you arrive.
Yeah. It's just like, like you said, a perfect example. I mean, it's just like a traditional D&D game. It depends on how you want to play it. I mean, if you don't want it to be a long journey, then they can just say they're there. It is a good chance, too, to use a lot of different skills, too. Like, I make them make navigation tool rolls. And when they don't make them, then it's like, oh, then you got off course, and that's when we'll see if there's a random encounter or something in space because they like drifted too far from their thing, and it might take them longer to get there. So they're when they buy like just enough food to get there, but they fail several navigation rolls, it's like it's running low. So like you just said, they might have to stop and resupply and give them those side quests.
Yeah,
it's just really fun. I don't know. I just like the openness of it.
Yeah, it's a super sandbox.
Yeah, it is a little daunting sometimes too when you think like, man, they can go anywhere, and it kind of like in some ways diminishes the concept of like campaigns on a planet, because you think like this might seem really dangerous when you're just a traditional planet bound thing, but then you think like, who cares, we can just zip and leave this crystal sphere behind.
Yeah, and it really does give the players the option to, if there's a world embroiled in war and they're like, we're gonna run away.
Yeah,
we're out of here.
White Rabbit asks, are there sphere charts? Not in the... actually, there probably is inside. There's a lot of second edition books, and there's a lot of online resources of fans, too, like SpellJammer.org and Lost.SpellJammer.org are two fan sites, and they kind of fell off about third edition, but they got some cool stuff. But in-game, absolutely. I mean, they spend a lot of time looking for new maps and to put in their navigation room, and I'll give them like advantage depending on if they have have the right charts and things to find places on their navigation checks.
So we talked about travel and we talked about the actual ships, but what would you say for weaponry for Spelljammer? What do you like to see in that?
Conventional and magical, like on the ship itself, there's like ballista and I can't think of anything, trebuchets and things like that. But as they get more powerful and more money now, it's like I'd like to see a little, maybe a nod to Ebron, like mage fire cannons, or even just like magic missile wand stations on the ship. The combat thing I came up with that's on the Nerdarchy site, kind of like you roll initiative for the ship, so it's a lot dependent on the pilot as far as like, I mean, obviously you could talk amongst the party, but if they want to be defensive or offensive. But I mean, it's a pretty kooky magical setting. In the original thing, there was like muskets and flintlock pistols. I haven't really gotten into that in my game. It's a lot more silly and magical, I guess. How about you?
Well, Kurt suggests the wave motion gun.
Yeah, which is from, what is that, Captain Harlock? Or Star Blazers? That old cartoon? I think that's what that's from.
Yeah, I don't recall.
I think it's Star Blazers.
Yeah, so I'm into using like energy weapons. I'm fine with that. Now, I think Starfinder uses electric plasma, so so the stuff does electric damage. But I'm fine with it doing force or like radiant. But radiant in D&D has kind of like a celestial connotation.
Yeah.
So I would probably have it be like a third, like another, either another type of energy, or just be considered like half fire, half force or something.
Talking about like ship weapons?
Yeah, I kind of just want to make them all force damage, but it's not technically force damage.
Yeah.
Like some kind of like energy bolt, well, I guess magic missile. Magic missile is a good example. It's just slamming you with some kind of magic projectile. So in my fan game that I had, I gave them 2 weapons, and they ended up testing them but never using them.
Oh yeah.
They're so in tune to the like regular, like, this is my character and I'm gonna fight and we're gonna be all fine. So they had these plasma rifles and they never used them. And I'm cool with that kind of stuff but as long as it's like fully magical, like you would charge it with some kind of magic capacity, it would almost be like if the spellcaster shoved spell slots into a battery pack, and then that spellcaster handed the rifle to the fighter and said, "Okay, shoot these things." So it kind of like distributes the fighter's resource. I mean, the mage's resource more.
I like the idea of just being like, magic missile wands like built into the side of the ship, so you can just like point it on a swivel and like shoot at other ships or incoming things.
Oh yeah, that would be cool. Like some kind of, or like a turret thing that you'd stick your hands into and then direct it.
I mean, we had talked off camera about this yesterday. Like, I generally like using existing stuff if I'm gonna homebrew things. So yeah, I would probably just use like a magic missile wand, at least as the base of like, how many charges does it get before it's depleted, and how much damage does it do. And maybe up it a little bit if you're like striking another ship with the thing. Although I do think like just completely disabling another ship should be pretty hard. I mean, that's generally not the outcome of our combats, ship-to-ship combats. Usually like you're trying to board them or, ram them or just get away.
Yeah, ship-to-ship combat, I could see like you'd either have to break the ship apart, which is a lot of damage.
Yeah.
Or you would have to sit there and like crack the spell helm or disable, like, I guess if you had some way of shoving an anti-magic field on the spell helm, it should almost like ion cannons. So if you had a way of like damaging directly the spell helm, if you can if you know where it is, you could fire this device into that area to try and damage it over time, which is you're not structurally damaging it, you're damaging the magical connection between the person driving the helm and maneuvering it. So it'd almost kind of be like disabling ion cannons. Which
you'd almost have to have something like that, because one thing I've always thought, like, the helm is the power, right? So like if you just had the helm sitting on like a plank of wood, I mean, could you essentially fly with it? It's like it's not dependent on there being a ship built around it. It's the helm that's doing all the work. So really, you could completely destroy the ship as long as there's a dude sitting on the seat.
In the end, it's just this guy flying with some debris.
Yeah, it's just like a little broken piece of planks under under the ship, and it would still create it. That's what creates the atmosphere around it. So technically, you could just fly through space on the chair. It'd be like Metron from the comics from the New Gods. Which again is like, I guess boarding is generally the goal, unless you're just gonna completely obliterate the ship, which you're probably not gonna do.
Well, I mean, a Kraken could probably do it.
Yeah, or like a dragon or something. But like ship to ship, you'd have to like disintegrate the entire ship and everybody on it.
Yeah. So.
And in which case, you wouldn't want to do that if you're a financial minded adventurer, because man, that's worth a lot of money. You want to salvage it. So.
Well, I like the turret ideas because, hey, sweetie, because the turrets could be this thing that you can't really hold them one-handed. They have to be stationed on something. Mm-hmm. So, if you had something that like shot disintegration beams or something like that, that would be really powerful if you could actually weaponize that and carry it around. Okay. Talk to you later.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, think about a ship of beholders. That'd be a mighty enemy to face. They all got disintegration beams. Or you could do cool things where they all focus them into together. They could focus their disintegration, like a Death Star.
That would be really cool looking.
Yeah.
And you could
just a super disintegration beam.
That's definitely something you could snag and put into your game and be like, it's a ship killer. Mm-hmm. Or an outpost. It's a ship that is pretty much a gun that has other ships protecting it.
It's interesting. Do Steph Z mentions, well, I guess he prefaces it by saying, pending how the DM rules, the riggings would also be a target. The whole ship, the look of it, and all the accoutrement are completely irrelevant in the original source material. It's
but they did have ship ratings. They did have ship ratings. So technically,
but that was just based on the helm.
Yeah,
like the sails don't do anything. So like I said, you could just have like a stone slab with a chair on it and as your ship. But
I could see it. I could see it thematically doing something, because it would be pretty ridiculous. A guy flying around. I mean, flying around space on a chair. Mm-hmm. So I would like it to be like, if the ship gets damaged enough, it goes slower. Yeah. But that could be part of the thing. Like maybe there are some types of turrets or cannons or spell wands that would actually disrupt how the spell helm works for a short amount of time, similar to dispel magic, like deadening an artifact for a little bit, or simply anti-magic shells and counterspell kind of thing.
Yeah. I don't remember. There must have been different sort of helm for beholders then, because if they just looked at having a beholder as an ally would be good, because you just got to look and it would turn it off.
Yeah. I talked about making the spell helms that worked off of spell-like abilities for creatures.
Mm-hmm. Although they actually use like kind of like enslaved beholder type creatures called Orbis, I think, to power their ships, right?
You could.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's kind of like I like SpellJammer and I like the campaign, and I want to discuss how you could re-envision it for 5th edition.
Okay.
With the 5th edition feel to it, but it's still being SpellJammer. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, do you want to have a beholder have things, or I'm perfectly fine with a SpellJam things that have spell-like abilities or psionic abilities having drives that would work off of that.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And then so it doesn't have to be like they have to enslave a spellcaster or have something else. Or, I mean, obviously a beholder doesn't want to just sit there staring at a spell helm all day.
Right.
So he would probably have some kind of slave do it for him.
Yeah. And there's different there's like like mind witnesses and different like beholder like creatures. So you could just do something like that where it's like they've just bred, a beholder-ish sort of thing that just powers the ship. Like that's what its magical power is.
Yeah.
They just imagined it into being. Isn't that how they come into being anyway? They just imagine, kind of like create themselves through their own imaginations.
That's what Volo's guide told me.
Yeah.
So continuing weaponry, I would try and stay away from things that look too futuristic. But I would still think that I'm not. I think it's the skip from flintlock pistols to just things that shoot energy bolts are fine. Is fine. Like that's the way I like SpellJammer with like beams of light shooting around and laser beams and stuff.
Yeah, well, just base it off the Artificer Thunder Cannon thing. But my group had one of their. Well, it was a player that just stopped showing up, so now he's an NPC. But he was an Artificer, and he just used the gunsmith. Is that what it was called? Gunsmith, yeah. Archetype, and it's just a magic gun.
Yeah, so you could take Lucky Owl says the DMG does offer guns. That's true. You can just take those rules right out of that section and just have it do whatever damage type you want. If you want it to be fire plasma, if you want it to be lightning plasma, if you want it to be able to be changed or different guns have different energy types it shoots, go right ahead.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, 5th edition is very easy to use SpellJammer because there's so many like those vague, like just that focus on like just do what works at your table sort of thing. So you could any of the things the people in chat are like, could you do this? It's like you could totally do that. I want to play in SpellJammer campaign as a College of Swords bard. Go for it, Morgan Bright.
Yeah, everybody needs the swashbuckler on the bridge. Because when they squirrel sporks, they're sporks. I don't, Doug. Whatever you said, I can't say it.
What? Oh, scrow.
Scrow. When the scrow show up, also known as space orcs or sporks to me, when they show up, you're going to need somebody with some blade techniques.
Yeah, you guys fought quite a few of those in your own SpellJammer Thanksgiving Eve game.
Yeah, I'm excited. This is going to be the finale this Thanksgiving.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, you guys abandoned Mark on an asteroid.
Yeah, I wasn't there for that.
You weren't? Oh. No, so how many times have you played it? Like 3? 3 years in a row?
Yeah, I think so. 3 years. This will be the 4th. It'll be the finale. I think we're going to be like uber level.
Yeah, capped, I think, right?
Yeah, I think capped. I have Wish. I just know that I have Wish, so
wow.
I'm going to be busting that out.
Maybe next Thanksgiving Eve you can actually play official 5th edition SpellJammer stuff.
Well, I think we're going to retire that, and someone else is going to have to take over the SpellJamming.
Oh,
you know what? If it's so popular, like if the 4th most searched term on our website is SpellJamming 5th edition, it sounds like people are really interested in it.
They're out there. We
should probably just start a campaign up of it.
Yeah, why not? I just keep getting bogged down with all kind of projects, but another thing I'd like to write an article about is like a warlock stuff that I've kind of came up with for our campaign because my and this wasn't even planned. My character, player that's a warlock, has a great old one packed, and he wanted it to be like some kind of like entity from the stars that his father was an astronomer and blah blah blah, and that was way before we even decided to do any SpellJammer stuff. So I kind of morphed it into being a Void Dragon, and there's another great Kobold Press product called Void Magic. I think it's called Void Magic, and it's for wizards. But I kind of adapted some of the spells and made them like invocations for him. So I was going to share that on the website, just because it's like he doesn't have to rely on Eldritch Blast every time. There is a way. Oh, yeah, Lucky Owl there's talking about Warlock Pack. Yeah, there's interesting interactions with Great Old Ones when you can actually go to the stars where they live.
Yeah, as far as asking about magic items, well, there's definitely a magic item for locking your spell helm, so people can't just jump on it and drive away.
Wow, I never thought about that. I'm gonna have somebody try to steal their ship.
Lock it down. Lock it down.
Although they usually leave people on the ship and take like away teams.
Yeah. Well, hey, they just need a bigger boarding party to take care of the away team that's left. I mean, to take care of the team that's left on board.
Yeah.
And if they don't have ways of messaging themselves magically, then they're not going to find out until they come back and the ship's not there.
Yeah, sending stones and message and stuff are very popular in our Spelljammer game.
Yeah. Yeah, Morgan Bright's talking about the futuristic weapons. Yes, they do either radiant or necrotic, and I think that's a good thing. Radiant, necrotic, or force is what I would think they would do.
Yeah, necrotic's almost like some kind of, like a disintegration beam. I would imagine something like that.
Well, disintegration does force damage in the early game, so
yeah, sorry.
It will, like, falling away into nothing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Entropic. There's no entropic damage.
There you go. A thrown fob. Yeah, there you go.
You find your Spelljammer.
Where did we
pick? Oh, yeah. Another magic device. I don't know if they have it, but locate Spelljammer. If you have the device, you can locate the Spelljammer that's attached to it, or send it out to just try and generally find a Spelljammer.
Mm-hmm.
That could be an interesting thing. Like, they find something that starts tugging them in a direction, and then they go on this quest to find out what the heck it is, and like, oh, maybe it's an artifact sword or something. It's like, no, it's a Spelljammer. This is the key fob.
That's a good idea, yeah, to start off your adventures that way.
Yeah, that could be something that's just someone has in a village somewhere for decades, and it's just like a passed down, like, lucky stone or something.
I think that's how those old novels where the guy got a cloak, and it actually turned out to be the helm for the actual Spelljammer ship, but it was like drawing him towards it and everything.
Yeah, and you know what? It could just point true north compared to where they are. So they're like, they don't go more than 20 miles from their village or whatever. So as far as they're concerned, it's just a compass. It just tugs you in the northern direction.
Mm-hmm.
But then as soon as the guy travels out, he's like, well, wait, now it's pointing like northeast.
Yeah, you could have a lot of different sorts of adventures based around that, that's for sure.
So we got weapons. We've got the Spelljammer helmet itself. We talked a little bit about like magic items that would be unique to that. I would think something that allows you to travel slowly in the astral sea, almost like, not like a preserver that's going to keep you alive in the astral sea or whatever, but actually allows you to traverse it slowly, like almost like a jetpack or something.
Oh, you mean like outside of the ship?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you get thrown off the ship, you're not just, they don't have to come back for you necessarily, or you might be able to find like safe haven somewhere before your sphere diminishes. That could be something that's in there.
Yeah, or it could, that you could make those kind of encounters too, where there could be like little, like patches of fungal stuff or whatever that they, like give you temporary amounts of air, so you'd have to navigate, that way outside of the ship.
Oh, do stuff Z. Yes, I did mention the like life jacket concept, so that could be another thing that could be considered a magic item.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking that could just get charged at the center.
And there's, I mean, a lot of like water type spells can have water breathing. I kind of let them use that for air breathing too, because it's like essentially you're in an oxygenless or deprived environment, so that makes sense to me. Mariner's armor, I think, is in the DMG that kind of like has some abilities that can help you. But yeah, any kind of aquatic stuff, swim speeds. Where were there language barriers? No, yeah, like if common is common across the prime-material plane. I mean, you could make it more complicated if you want, certainly, but and that's just one of those conceits of Dungeons and Dragons where it's like people speak common wherever you go, even if it's another planet. Common on Greyhawk's the same as it is on Toril.
Yeah, or you could have something like, what is it, the Babel fish or whatever like that.
Yeah, if you wanted to make that a challenge in your campaign, then sure, you could certainly have common not be common, and maybe they have to find translators and things. Yeah, or just get a warlock with awakened mind.
Yeah, that's something that can just, whatever you decide to do. You can have it be an adventure. You can have it be their first thing that they need to do is to figure out where exactly they can get something from. Sorry, my kid's upset.
Let's see. Jinker GM says, "Is SpellJammer more Star Wars or Star Trek? Out of those two, definitely more Star Wars. There's nothing scientific about it."
Yeah, it's definitely space opera with magic instead of the technology they don't explain and the Force. It's just magic.
Right. Yeah, a lot of the questions, like, and this I would apply to any kind of RPG or D&D. It's like, the challenges you face. Well, those are your adventures. If you want that to be something to explore in your campaign, then just make that the object of a quest, like trying to communicate. It doesn't always have to be like slay the beast and free the kidnapped princess. I mean, just finding out how to communicate with other people can be a really rewarding adventure.
Yes, and I would also say, as far as adventures go and where you could go, I know we talked about the sandbox concept earlier, but I would say you'd want to, if you could travel to other campaign settings, you want to exclude certain ones, and you want to figure that out before you let them go someplace you don't want them to actually go.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I would probably stick like Forgotten Realms. Heck, Forgotten Realms, if you really wanted to, could be divided up into planets.
Mm-hmm.
It's got so many different settings in it and different areas. They could almost be in Star Wars fashion, like, oh, there's a swamp planet, there's a desert planet, that's Al-Qadim, and there's the Qatar. I don't remember what the Oriental style game is.
Oh, Karatur.
Yeah, I could never remember.
Yeah.
So that could be a different place rather than just all in the same world. So even if you just know Forgotten Realms, you could split that up. You could split that up into different areas, like different places that actually have to spell jam to gain access to.
Yeah, it's got the same challenges as a traditional game. I think a lot of it's just listening to your players and seeing what interests them. Like, our game, there is a big sprawling story going on, and there's danger, but they seem to really just enjoy taking on small jobs and things like that. So I just let them do that, and then every now and again I'll sprinkle in bits of the bigger plot and see what they're interested in and go from there.
Yeah, so we're coming up on the hour. I've actually got some craziness happening at my house, so I think we're going to be cutting this out. But let us know in the comments below if you have any other more questions. Thanks again for all those people who helped us out with the GoFundMe and the Patreon for getting the Nerdarchy Ted and Nerdarchy Dave out to the great opportunity to do an interview with Satine Phoenix of Maze Arcana on the GM tips for that's going to be on the Geek and Sundry channel. I don't know when that's going to be released, but they're going to be filming it this Saturday. So thanks again for all your help. Thanks again for watching and commenting and hanging out with us, everybody. And thanks, Doug, for being here twice now.
Oh,
and,
sure.
I'm going to try and get some of the writers like Megan on and see what they're up to writing wise. And let us know what you think in the comments below, as well as like, sharing, and subscribe. And if you'd like to see other types of live streams over the next few days, let us know that in the comments below as well. Until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.